but you are allowed to change your mind at any point, especially and most importantly, when it comes to your body. Welcome to the Date with Confidence podcast, a place to come for dating advice, support, and stories that'll either fill you with hope or relief that your dating experience wasn't as bad as it could have been. With practical episodes that'll provide you with easy to implement tips to help you feel confident AF on your next date, alongside lighthearted catch-ups where your host Rebecca, that's me by the way, shares her own experience dating after 4 years of the single life. You are guaranteed to end each episode feeling less alone in your dating struggles, empowered to never settle again, and confident that the best is yet to come. And if it all falls to shit, there's a special first season dedicated to breakups. You are welcome, my friend. Subscribe, review, and share with your single friends. You can say no at any time. You can say no when you've said yes. You're allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to say no if you feel uncomfortable. This is so important, and I'm actually a little bit devastated because when I went to Valencia in October this year, me and my friend Amandine, we recorded for 3 hours an amazing podcast episode for you. And one of the conversations that we touched on was this idea of consent. And it was a really important conversation that we'd had, but I somehow managed to delete the file, and it is gone forever. And I've had a good cry over it, but obviously I can't share that conversation with you now because it has disappeared. So I thought I would touch on consent with you anyway, because I do think that this is such an important topic, and I feel like there is still this stigma or this sense of guilt or this sense of feeling bad if we say no. And that's not okay. We are allowed to say no. And I wanted to share some examples of situations where I have said no, or how you can kind of set your boundaries in advance. So for example, when I was messaging Ted, who I spoke about in the This Is What I Deserve Now episode, we were messaging a lot. The conversation was very sexual. And there were a few moments, I think there was 3 times maybe, where the conversation of exchanging photos came up. So one of the things he said was, it's taking everything in me not to send you a dick pic right now. And my response was, yeah, don't do that. And he fully respected that boundary. And then I think there was a time, a week or so later, 10 days later, where he asked me to send a photo, and I was like, no, I don't send photos to people that I don't know. And again, that boundary was respected. I feel like he was trying to push it a little bit, and then when I ignored him for a few hours, he kind of got the message that my boundaries are my boundaries and I'm very strict with them. But even during those conversations, one thing that I like to do when I am dating people, I set this kind of rule for myself around not kissing on the first date. And it's not a rule that I have to live by. It's not something where I'm like, I'm never kissing anyone on a first date. It's just a bit of a boundary that I have for myself, purely because if I go on a date with someone and I don't feel that physical connection, having that boundary for myself makes me feel okay about not kissing them, if that makes sense. So if I didn't have that boundary and kind of presumed that I would kiss people on the first date, then I might feel pressured, and that pressure is coming from myself. I might pressure myself into being okay with kissing someone, but I want to kiss someone when I'm good and ready. So if I go on a date with someone and it feels right, I'm going to kiss them. If I go on a date with someone and I feel like I want to sleep with them that night, I'm going to do that. They're my boundaries. I'm pretty fluid in them. And even when I was speaking to Ted, one of the things that I'd specifically said in the message to him was, I don't kiss on the first date. And I have said that to multiple people that I have been about to go on dates with. I have said it in our conversations beforehand, especially if a couple of the conversations have been flirty. Like when I was speaking to Rob, he'd asked me about a date that I'd been on with another guy and was like, did you have a cheeky little kiss at the end? And I was like, no, I don't kiss on the first date. And I like to kind of put that out there. I wouldn't just, if someone asked me on a date, I wouldn't say, yes, that's fine, and just so you know, I don't kiss on a first date, because I don't think that's necessary. But when it has been brought up in the conversation, like when Ted was like, if I try and kiss you on the first date, am I going to get a slap? And I was like, I've already told you I don't kiss on a first date. But we'll have to see. Because it probably would have been fine. But I think even in those scenarios, I think there are times where we feel like the easier option is to just go with what the other person wants because we're worried about how they're going to react to your boundary. But what I've learned is this: how someone responds to your no doesn't mean you shouldn't say it, because it is not your responsibility to handle someone else's reaction to your boundaries. And if they make you feel bad about saying no, if they tease you, if they get angry, if they get annoyed with you, that doesn't mean that you should change your mind if you really don't want to do something. And that is in everyday life. That's not just in dating. I mean, obviously we're talking about dating now because it's the Date with Confidence podcast, but that's in everyday life. If you don't want to do something, and you really, really don't, whether that's kissing someone, sleeping with someone, going on a date with someone, I don't know, going out for dinner with someone, doing a chore for, I don't know, whatever, you're allowed to say no. And if somebody makes you feel bad about it, that doesn't mean you change your mind. Instead, you double down on self-care, on grounding, on resetting your nervous system. And you remind yourself that you deserve to say no. It's really hard to kind of set and stick to these boundaries sometimes, especially if you're a people pleaser like me. But we have to have them in place. Now, there are two different scenarios in which I have said no. So there was one time where I know this is something that me and Amandine talked about, which is really frustrating that I don't have this conversation. But one of the examples I shared was, there was a guy who was kind of he wasn't fully in the friend group, but I'd known him for a couple of months on and off. Like, we'd been for drinks together. I think he might have even worked where I worked on the pub crawl temporarily when I was living in Thailand. And there was this big annual festival, and I was working at the bar there. I think it was this night. I was working at the bar there, got horrendously drunk and had to go home. And he offered to drive me home, and I was like, great, like, this is someone that I know. From my recollection, I don't think we ever kissed. There'd been no hint at anything sexual happening. I'd probably flirted because that's just who I am. I'm like a naturally flirty person. But he had said about taking me home, and I was like, great, thank you so much. Got home, and I remember him taking me upstairs to like put me to bed because I was very, very drunk. And again, thinking he was my friend, this was fine. And I think he tried it on with me. I remember him like trying to kiss me, or I don't know whether he was like on top of me or whatever. And I was like, no. And I said no multiple times. And he got really angry with me. And that was an example of one of the reasons that we don't say no is because of other people's reactions. But I stood by that and I continued to say no. And then I think, like, I lived in a house with like 5 guys. So I probably said something to them and was like, get him out or whatever. I can't really remember. But I think in those scenarios, we shouldn't have to be prepared. This is the fucking problem. We shouldn't have to be prepared for someone to be angry at our boundaries. But unfortunately, that is just the way things are at the moment. And I do really hope and kind of believe that things are changing. But unfortunately, there are moments where someone will react badly. And in that scenario, maybe it would have been easier for me to just be like, oh, do you know what? Crack on while I'm in this semi-conscious state. But that's obviously horrendously unsafe and dangerous. And what's the word that I'm looking for? It's just not something that I would have agreed to. And I think you have to be careful in those scenarios, and instead of, as I said, just going along with, okay, I'll let him assault me, I stood by my no, but then sought support from my friends, reassured myself that the no's okay, and reminded myself that I haven't done anything wrong. Because also in this situation, oh my God, there's so much I want to talk about on this. There is this habit, this perception, this way of being that society has where so many people will go, but you shouldn't have got that drunk, or you shouldn't have let him take you home. And I'm not here for any of that victim blaming bullshit. I say victim, I wasn't a victim. But I'm not here for any of that blame bullshit. A man should hear a no and respect your fucking no. And then in the other instance, there was this time where, again, I was in Thailand. I was at a bar with this guy, invited him back to my place, and we were having sex. Like, we were in the middle of sex. And then I was like, this is just not working. It is not working for me. I've changed my mind. And I stopped and just said to him, like, you need to leave. I think it was a nice way, I don't really know. It probably wasn't as nice as I could have been. But he was a gentleman. He got up and he left, and he didn't get angry. He respected my no. And this is what I'm saying, like, there were so many times where we feel like because we've said yes initially, we have to continue with that decision. But you are allowed to change your mind at any point, especially and most importantly when it comes to your body. And I guess that's just what I wanted to say. If you feel like you have to go along with things that people say to you, if you feel like once you've committed to a date, you have to go on it, even if you don't want to, if you feel like you have to kiss them because they've made a move, you fucking don't. You are allowed to say no whenever, wherever, however many times you want to. And what I've also learned in building up the confidence to say no is that consent is actually really attractive. When I've been communicating with people and they have asked my permission to share certain information, when they have asked my permission to send a photo and I've declined and they've respected that, when they have asked my permission to ask me a personal question, there's something about that that's really attractive and makes me feel safe, because I'm like, okay, granted you don't know what someone's going to be like until you meet them, but during those conversations it's like you're listening to me, you're asking me, you're respecting me, and that is something that is very attractive. Whereas you get the other people who somehow have this entitlement that they can talk to you a certain way or they can message you a certain way. Again, an example, I had my first unsolicited dick pic the other week, which was a massive fucking shock. So I'd met this guy on an app, I'd matched with him. I think we'd had 2 sentences. I think he'd said something about me being attractive or something, and I was like, thanks. And then he'd asked me like where I was from, and then his next comment was, your lips look really kissable, do you know that? And I was like, great. Like, I replied and was like, I've been told that before, thanks. I think I said, I've been told that before, but thank you. And then he was like, I think he said something about what do they taste like, and I'd ignored him. And then he messaged again and was like, I don't suppose there's any chance to meet up for a drink tonight, and I ignored it. And then he messaged me again a couple of days later with, or ever, as in like meeting up for a drink or ever. And again, I ignored it. And then because I was just busy and I was having like good conversations with other people. And then I got this message with a photo of him in his boxers with his dick in it, and saying something about like, put your fingers around that or some sleazy thing. And then I obviously didn't reply because these messages were sent in the space of like 3 hours. So he sent another one, and then he sent another one with like laughing emojis. And I'm just like, I'm not fucking here for this. So I reported him to the app and blocked him. Because in those scenarios, he came across as the type of person, if I'd have responded and been like, what the fuck do you think you're doing? What made you think it was okay to do this? He was a 42-year-old man, and I'm like, if you have not learned that by this age, unsolicited photos and messages like that are inappropriate, then I've got absolutely zero interest in communicating with you or getting into a conversation where you're likely going to be aggressive and a complete dick about things. So, but anyway, that's kind of a rambly. I didn't plan any notes on this, but I'm hoping that it's just the reminder that you need, that it is okay to say no. Say no whenever the fuck you like. Yeah, you can contribute to the Date with Confidence podcast if you go to datewithconfidencepodcast.com/contribute. I would love to hear your dating stories, your icks, your green flags, red flags. Ask me questions, ask for my advice. Just get involved. I would love to hear from you. And I will see you in the next one. Thanks so much for listening to the Date with Confidence podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Subscribe, rate and review, and share it with your single friends.